I think that has caused so many problems in America today. This is why the church in America is so anemic. This is why Christianity has little or no effect on the culture around it. Because most people who call themselves Christians today don't look any different from those who aren't Christians. Sometimes those who call themselves Christians act worse and behave more poorly than those who don't have any spiritual affiliation. And it pains me to say it, but it's true. For instance, here's a couple stats. I don't know if you know this, but 70%, 75%, somewhere in there, of the people in America say they're Christians, and yet only 19% of the people attend a church on any given Sunday. Now, some people are going to say, well, that means that because everybody doesn't go every Sunday. No, 19% counts everybody who says, I go to church at least once every 3 months, that I'm a part of a church. So what does that tell you? Welcome, everybody, to the Salty Pastor Podcast. We are currently in a series on the 7 deadly emotions, and we're going to dig into number 4 today. Our goal as a podcast is to coach you up in your faith. We want you to learn to think for yourself. We want you to know what you believe and why you believe it. And one of the things about the Salty Pastor is to help get your intellectual juices flowing so that you start using those critical thinking skills. And what I think and what I opine is not the most important thing about this podcast. It's helping you discover what you think and what you believe. It's your journey of faith. What I want to do is help you be successful in your journey of faith. Now, as I said on Tuesday, our website is currently being transitioned over by the e-commerce guys out there in the interwebs. I always thought that was funny. And they're trying to get that. As soon as that's done, I will let you know so that you can go there, you can donate. Now, if you want to go there and just download or look at old podcasts and look at different topics, you can do various different studies. Feel free. They're all there. And of course, right now, they're all free. So please avail yourself of them. However, the donate button isn't quite working yet, and as soon as it does, I will let you know. But you also can go to our YouTube channel, The Salty Pastor, and you can like and subscribe. The more subscribers we have, the more that the algorithm begins to recognize it, and it grows the ministry. So please, love for you to do that. And finally, if you keep praying for us and keep praying for what's going on, love to have you do that. Now, the 7 deadly emotions is basically a response to Evagrius's Ponticus's 7 deadly sins, and his 7 deadly sins were a juxtaposition of Aristotle's 7 virtues. And I decided that, well, since we live in the psychological man today, meaning that most people think with emotional logic instead of rational logic, that it might be good to address it in that way and see what happens. And the emotions that are so deadly are, number 1, anger, number 2, fear and anxiety, number 3, despair or sadness, number 4, boredom or slothfulness or laziness, number 5 is guilt and shame, number 6 is envy, and number 7 is lust or emptiness, the desire to need to feel something. And this week we are talking about slothfulness, laziness, or in other words, boredom. And our working definition was simply this: it's a complete lack of effort. You get into an emotional space where you just don't really care about trying anymore. And the reason we get into this space is because, well, there's lots of reasons, but it could be fear of failure or fear of trying. It could be avoidance of conflict or being uncomfortable. It could be a lack of discipline. It could be passivity. And we talked about how passivity on Tuesday is the same for men and for women. It has detrimental effects in your life. And the reason why it's so deadly is because it creates a context for all the other 7 deadly emotions to run without hindrance in your life. So I thought it was really important to understand is that slothfulness is learned. The Bible sometimes calls this idleness. And if you remember on Tuesday, we talked about Paul's teaching to Timothy in 1 Timothy chapter 5, verse 13, where he says something that's really unique. He says this: at the same time, they also learn to be idle as they go from house to house, and not merely idle, but also they become gossips and busybodies, talking about things not proper to mention. Now, what you see here is exactly what we talked about earlier, and that is when you're idle, it gives opportunity for the other deadly emotions to take root. Gossip and busybodies are outflows of these other deadly emotions. And we'll talk more about gossip later when we get into the issue of envy. But what happens is, he says, once you learn to be idle, then these other bad emotions can really take root in your life. So I think it's important to understand that. Now, on Tuesday, we did the parable of the talents. We asked the question, what was the third servant doing while the other two were out working, while they were out applying themselves, while they were out growing? I would think that that third servant must have been one bored individual, and that is, he had nothing to do. He wasn't planning, he wasn't strategizing, he wasn't sowing, he wasn't reaping, he wasn't investing, he wasn't organizing, he wasn't overseeing. I mean, he wasn't doing anything. He buried the thing in the backyard and just left it there. Well, I don't know if it's backyard, but he buried it somewhere and left it and then gave it back to the master. He didn't even put it in the bank. And so I think this issue of boredom is something that you really need to address in your life. And that is, where does boredom come from, and why does it teach us to be idle? How do we learn to be idle through boredom? And here's something that I think I'd like you to really consider. I'd like you to really ask yourself, wow, is this really how it works inside of me? And this is what it is that most people have been raised in a digital age. And sometimes people, even not necessarily digital age, but an experiential age. For instance, up until about 1970, if you were born in America, you pretty much grew up in your neighborhood, right? Americans weren't nearly as mobile as they are now. The percentage of car ownership in the 70s, it was dramatically lower than what it is today. So what would happen is you would be sent out to play. You'd have to play in the neighborhood, and you'd have to come back when it was dark or time for supper. And that's what you had to do. In today's world, kids are raised with all kinds of either screens in front of their face or experiences. These kids are being raised on, they go to indoor gyms, indoor pools, they've got water parks, they've got movie theaters, they've got Nerf war gun places to go to, they've got sports, they're playing all kinds of sports, they're doing all these kinds of things. When I was young, you got to play one sport if you were lucky, right? You might get one sport, and then you had to figure out how to get back and forth from practice. I remember one year when I was in middle school, I played soccer. My parents were like, well, that's great, but you got to get yourself to practice. So I had to ride my bike to soccer practice every single practice. I still remember that today. And what's so interesting, because riding home after soccer practice was kind of tough because you were exhausted. But that's what it was like. But today, this is what I'm trying to get at. This is a point I'm trying to make. I'm not trying to knock parenting today, and I'm not trying to knock kids today. What I'm saying, though, is that the unintended consequence is that we are trained to experience, right, a stimulation either emotionally or physically outside of ourselves. So what happens when there's no stimulation, physical or emotional, outside of yourself? You experience boredom. And that is how we are being trained to be idle. And so you want to go to a screen, you want to go to some physical experience, but the capacity to just sit and find stimulation in thinking or reading or doing a hobby, like making a model or, a fort, or do just your creative imagination or drawing, these types of things tend not to be as significant in today's world. And what happens is, this is why young people tend to be more bored and they become more idle. And when that happens, when you rely on an external source, then what happens is you experience the law of diminishing return. That is that every experience or external source that stimulates you has to get bigger, better, stronger, or more potent. That's called the law of diminishing returns. And this is actually the primary argument against the Greek philosopher Aristippus, who was a disciple of Socrates, and he postulated hedonism. He said the point of life is to get as much pleasure as you possibly can. And the argument against it is, well, that's an infinite regressive loop. Basically, what that means is that you get stuck because you normalize to a certain pleasure, so it needs to be more intense or more out of the ballpark, or it needs to be more wild or something like that. And that's called, everything you do has a diminishing return on it. Instead of a multiplying return, it has a diminishing return on it. And in the same way, that's what boredom does, is it grows when we require external stimuli, whether physical, intellectual, or emotional, in order for us to not be bored. And that's how we're training ourselves to be idle. So, the number one problem with screens for kids today is that it robs them from learning how to engage their mind instead of just being bored. Screens teach kids this thing that I just described. If you don't want to be bored, you have to have an external stimuli. Now, this is all subconscious and nobody thinks about it. But what does the salty pastor always say? Oftentimes it's not what you're thinking, but it's how you think that makes all the difference. And so we can't train kids enough to be engaged in how do I stimulate myself and grow without external factors. Like, for instance, one of the best things you can do as a family is you can sit around the table, eat dinner together, and teach your kids how to have conversation. Just teach them how to talk. Teach them how to express themselves. Can you have a dynamic and a fluid and a fun conversation? What does it take to be engaged with somebody else? That's really important, I think, and it stops people from becoming idle. So that's one of the things. Now, I'll get into a little bit more of that in a moment, but what I want to do now is I want to take this notion of how to counteract the idleness temptation in our lives. How do we overcome the penchant for passivity in our own lives? How do we intentionally engage and make effort in our lives without overworking and burning ourselves out? How do you do that? Well, let's apply these principles that we just talked about to various areas of our lives, okay? Let's start with you and your marriage. If you're married, if you never learned how to engage your brain and overcome boredom, then guess what? Your marriage is going to suffer. Think about it. Oftentimes in today's world, people go outside of their marriage to stimulate their lives. They develop individual hobbies, individual pursuits, individual relationships. Sometimes sometimes they get at work, they work more, they doing all of these things outside of their marriage. And what happens is because maybe they never learned how to actually invest and sustain and bring life to their relationship called marriage. A covenantal marriage or a commitment to marriage isn't simply enough. you can't just say, well, I'm married, I'm never going to not be married. What you have to say is, I'm married. How can I put effort into my marriage? And it's really interesting to me because I have seen passivity in marriage cause husbands and wives to have very bad experiences. I've seen men become passive in their marriage, and when they do this, it has all kinds of negative repercussions. It has negative repercussions on them, their own sense of well-being, their own sense of satisfaction in life. I have seen women become passive in their relationship with their husbands. I know this is salty, but a lot of women are like, I'm not passive. Well, I want you to consider that maybe you are, and this is why. Thinking about your marriage, wondering why it's not better, talking to your girlfriends about your marriage is not going to actually be an investment in your marriage. You see, if you want to not be passive in your marriage, then you need to be intentional about your relationship with your husband. And so I know that's salty, but I think it's really important to understand is that passivity, laziness, slothfulness, lack of effort in your relationship with your spouse, whether you're a man or a woman, husband or wife, is never a good thing. Okay, it's never a good thing. Now, I know that ladies can think about it, want something different, and yet not overtly try. Men are different, and that is that they assume that I have peace in my life, and so they take it for granted, not realizing that their marriage is a lot like their car. Okay, I'm not trying to be crass. I'm just trying to simply say is that your car is a phenomenal tool. What it does is it could get you from A to B. It can be comfortable. You can love it. You can have great experiences in it. But if you don't change the oil on that thing, if you don't keep the brakes in good shape, if you don't do the maintenance on it, guess what happens? It wears out. And men make the mistake of thinking that their marriage is this perpetually sustaining thing that they don't have to put any effort into. Now, in all honesty, sometimes they have tried and it didn't go well, or what they do is criticized. Sometimes that's true. And so they kind of give up on that. I think that the issue is that I want to get to is that slothfulness, laziness, idleness in your marriage is never a good thing. And what it does is it gives context, it gives freedom for all the other deadly emotions to run rampant in your marriage. So if you're a female and you're unhappy in your marriage, then my challenge for you is to figure out what are the positive things that you could do to invest in your marriage. Instead of approaching your husband and saying, this is what I need him to do so that I'm happy, ask the question, what makes my husband happy? What could I do to sacrificially love him and build him up? And if you're a man, when was the last time you asked yourself, what does my wife really need? How much do I affirm her? How much do I encourage her? How much do I compliment her to show her value to me? When was the last time I rearranged my schedule to do something for her for no other reason than I love her? You see, that's really important for guys, is to not be passive. I cannot iterate this enough. If you're married, passivity, idleness, slothfulness kills your relationship. That's why it's so deadly. Your marriage is a living, breathing, wonderful thing. And the more you invest in it, the more you inspire it, the more you encourage it, the more you bring life to it, the more blessing, joy, and happiness you're going to have in your life. So do not let the deadly emotion of sloth infect your marriage. Don't let that happen. Be somebody who intentionally makes effort every single day to love your spouse. The next one I want to talk about is parenting. You know that Boredom brings passivity. Passivity is, in essence, slothfulness, a lack of any effort in whatever situation you find yourself. And parenting requires ongoing attention. And parenting is something that you have to continually get better at. It is in the period of calm. It is in the period of peace where your parenting skills make the most difference in your parenting. It's really important to understand this, is that I've seen so many parents take their kids to Walmart, to grocery store. The kid has a meltdown and throws a fit because they can't get what they want. And then the parent is in a hurry because parents are busy. You know, both of you working jobs and you pick the kid up from daycare and you got to stop and get stuff for supper and you're on your way home. You don't have time for this. Okay. That is not a good environment to improve your parenting skills. One of the most important things is pre-training. You know, go shopping when you don't have to buy anything, right? Go shopping with your 4-year-old, whatever, when you don't have to buy anything. Go to the grocery store and say, okay, we're going to go in here, and I just want you to know that we only go in here and get the things we need. We don't go in here and get things we want. So let's go and let's just look at the stuff. What do you think we need today? What do you think? Okay, well, we're not going to get anything. So, okay, let's go. So you go in, you don't get anything, and you walk out and go, see, how difficult was that? Oh, that was fine, mommy. So then when you're tired and they're tired, then you get into that situation. It's like, well, I want Fruity Loops. And you say, no, we're not getting any Fruity Loops. You don't have any context, background, or training to fall back on in that moment. That's why having these pre-experiences are so important. Setting expectations for your kids. And that requires effort. I found over and over again as a father is that my worst fathering happened when I had an agenda of things that I had to do and I was bringing my kids along to get them done. I found my best fathering was when I got rid of my agenda and I just said, you know what? I'm going to teach my kids, what it's like to go to the home improvement store. I'm going to teach my kids how to fix the sprinkler system or how to change oil. It's not my agenda. I'm just going to do it and teach them the process. And those became some of the best times with my kids, is teaching them and being with them. And I was more fully engaged. I look back with such great fondness on those experiences. And I feel that was my best fathering. Why? Because I got rid of my agenda and the agenda became what? Their education in life. And so parenting requires effort. You can't be lazy at it. You can't put zero effort in it. You don't have a kid bury it in the backyard and then dig it up when they're 18 and say, okay, you're done. You're off and you're on your own. Doesn't work that way. Do you see why slothfulness in parenting really is deadly? So if you're a parent, my encouragement to you is to take time to be intentionally investing in your skill set as a parent. Become a better parent. Take time to parent, and you're going to have more joy and happiness in your life than you could ever imagine. The whole issue, though, of slothfulness, I think, is most pronounced in the next area of life. And I know this is salty, but we really need to dig into this, and that is people's faith. In America today, I would say that I have seen probably the laziest Christians that have ever existed in the history of the world. Most Christians today are cultural Christians, and that is their value system, their morality, the way they make decisions are not influenced by the Holy Spirit or the presence of Christ in their life at all. It's not influenced by what the Bible actually teaches at all. It's really amazing to me when people how ignorant people are just of what the New Testament says. And I think that has caused so many problems in America today. This is why the church in America is so anemic. This is why Christianity has little or no effect on the culture around it. Because most people who call themselves Christians today don't look any different from those who aren't Christians. Sometimes those who call themselves Christians act worse and behave more poorly than those who don't have any spiritual affiliation. And it pains me to say it, but it's true. For instance, here's a couple stats. I don't know if you know this, but 70%, 75%, somewhere in there, of the people in America say they're Christians, and yet only 19% of the people attend a church on any given Sunday. Now, some people are going to say, well, that means that because everybody doesn't go every Sunday. No, 19% counts everybody who says, I go to church at least once every 3 months, that I'm a part of a church. So what does that tell you? That tells you that, 70% say they're Christians, but only 20% are actually practicing their faith. So that is a huge problem, I think. Now, why would I bring that up? Is that to, make people feel guilty or bad about their journey of faith? No, not at all. The point I'm making is simply this, is that if you're a follower of Christ, you have to have some intentional spiritual training going on in your life. You really do. You have to figure out how to take it seriously. If nothing else, have a little bit of a, morning devotion. There's so many different ways to do that. Find a ministry somewhere in your local church or somewhere else that you can participate in on a regular basis. The issue here is that if you're not intentional in your faith, if you're lazy about your faith, then you're going to have a weak faith. And that, my friends, it makes your life so difficult. Because when you need it, it's not there to help you overcome the challenges in this world. So I would encourage you to find some type of spiritual training. If you have friends that have them listen to the Salty Pastor podcast. That's a great way to start. Do a Bible study at your church. Go and have a one-on-one meeting and discipleship with another with another man or another woman. If you're a female, get in a woman's Bible study for discipleship. If you're a man, find a men's group, something of that nature that can really help you grow spiritually. Number 2, you should find a ministry that says, okay, once a week, I'm going to spend 1 hour and I'm going to do this to help somebody else, completely outside of myself. Find a way to give. The most incredible thing that you will ever do is take money that you have, even if you're living out of sorts right now and you don't have enough money to get by, and you take a little bit and you say, look, I'm going to give this to somebody else. I'm going to give it to a ministry. I'm going to give it to a church. I'm going to give it to, I'm going to be generous. I'm going to give it to a need. What happens is that is how you grow spiritually in an intentional way. You're making an effort, okay? So this is really important. And I kind of want to close on this kind of a thing, and that is this, is that there's this old saying out there. It's attributed to Edmund Burke. He actually didn't say it, but I'll get into that for a second. It says, the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. And this is the deadly sin and slothfulness. It's the deadly effect, the impact, the consequence of being slothful, putting no effort into your life. Now, he didn't actually say that. It comes from John Stuart Mills, who was a philosopher. And in 1867, he had an inaugural address at the University of St. Andrews, and this is what he said. Let not anyone pacify his conscience by the delusion that he can do no harm if he takes no part and forms no opinion. Bad men need nothing more to compass their ends than that good men should look on and do nothing. He is not a good man who, without protest, allows wrong to be committed in his name, and with the means which he helps to supply, because he will not trouble himself to use his mind on the subject. So what is he saying? He said the belief that you can do nothing and not cause harm is false. You can't sit on the sidelines of life and think your life is going to be fine. Not going to happen. Number 2, not having an opinion is worse than having one. You got to have an opinion and stick up for that opinion. Be ready to have it corrected with facts and truth. But hey, at least think about these things. Now, you don't have to have an opinion on every single thing. That's not the point. But on the biggest things about being married, about your kids, about your spiritual life, you better have an opinion on that. Otherwise, you're approaching your faith, your marriage, your family slothfully. Don't do that. Then the last thing he says, it is wrong to not use your mind on the most important subjects of your life. You must think about them and draw conclusions. So if you're a follower of Christ, remember, spiritually train, do a ministry, find a place to give. If you're married, right, invest in your marriage. If you have kids or grandkids, you should be wanting to learn parenting skills and experiences to help you be a better parent. If you're an American citizen, this is my final point, is that if you're an American citizen, you should vote. Any person who is a follower of Christ and says, well, I'm not going to vote because, I don't care what you put in the blank after the word because, that is laziness and slothfulness. You should vote. Be informed on policy, not personality. The personality of the people is irrelevant. The policy of the people is where you should make your decision. Use your brain, but you should vote. And you should say, I'm doing this because I don't want to be slothful. All right, that's Salty Pastor signing off for today. Remember, always think for yourself.